Well, if you're just joining us this week, we've been looking at verse 1 of chapter 2 in First Peter, and we've been talking about how we need to rid ourselves of certain things that really are self-destructive. And what we looked at yesterday was the issue of malice, and I said that really malice is the ultimate result of what begins as the seed of resentment. And if we let that get planted in our soul and don't confess it, then it will grow into a bitterness. And the bitter tree, the poisonous fruit of bitterness is malice. It's the expression of that resentment. I'm going to get even. I'm going to settle the score. I'm going to make you pay. And it's brought so much hardship. I mean, really, when you talk about so many violent acts, and even the idea of divorce and broken relationships, that if we are motivated by internalized anger or bitterness, resentment towards somebody, it's going to become toxic to you. Someone once said it's like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. It's so important, as I talked about yesterday at some length, that when you see yourself becoming resentful, somebody does something, says something, you're offended and you resent what they do, then you need to really bring that to the Lord and confess it and get it off of you. You hold it up in prayer and say, Lord, forgive me for the resentment I feel right now towards this person, and He will take it. Now, you may have to revisit that over and over again until that becomes more of a habit. But it's important that the next thing that he ties into this is, he said, that we need to rid ourselves of deceit. And deceit is really the word that's used here means to conceal or to misrepresent something. In other words, we present things as they aren't, but rather as we want other people to think they are. And even the other person that we may be trying to deceive is ourselves. Because I think that in order to be an effective liar, you have to begin by believing your own lies. And the people who are resentful and bitterness and filled with malice are some of the most skilled self-deceivers that there are in the planet. And so, my father used to always say to me that you have to be a salesman. You have to be, excuse me, I rephrase this. He said the easiest person to sell to is a salesman. And he said that because at that point in his life, he was involved in sales. But it's this kind of idea that you're going to get something that's going to be a great benefit to you. Oftentimes, it clouds your vision. It's kind of like people signing for timeshares and then finding out that the only time that they share is the time they spend working to make the money to pay for the timeshare that they don't get to use very often. I remember years ago, my brother had a timeshare in Cabo, and they let us have these coupons that they had gotten to use it for. We went there for 2 weeks, and I found that most of the people who were there were shocked that my wife and I were staying there for 2 consecutive weeks, because they got to come once a week, 1 week every other year. And they couldn't figure out how we worked this out. Well, I won't go into the details about how my brother and his wife were so clever enough to pull this off. But the bottom line is a lot of people get snookered into stuff because they think it's a good deal, and then they discover that after they bring it home, it's not what they thought it was. They open the package and it's been misrepresented. Well, the terrible thing, and I'm trying to draw an illustration here, is that oftentimes we can be so anxious to want or to do something that we don't really cautiously approach it and ask God to guide and direct us. My wife and I have developed this habit, this discipline, that before we buy anything of significance, we really pray about, Lord, is this something we should do? Is this something we should invest in? I don't mean to the petty things. When we go to the grocery store, if I go with my wife, I share with her what I would like to have. And I don't spend a lot of time praying about it, because obviously I'm following my appetite. That's why we've learned you don't go shopping for food when you're hungry. But the thing that's really significant is that when there are things that are going to be costly and have a big impact, then you really do pray. And there are actually points in our life when we didn't have very much money and we'd go to the store. We would literally say, God, we pray that you would guide and direct us and provide for us, that we'd find good deals. And it was always amazing to me how God would provide. I mean, it just used to blow my mind away. I remember one church I was serving at, they required us to wear suits on Sunday morning, and I didn't have a suit. And so we went to, I think, a J.C. Penney store, and I was looking at suits, and I found a suit on the rack that was really, I mean, it was like $49 or something. And of course, this was many years ago. And I put it on and it fit me perfectly. It didn't have to be adjusted at all. It was as if it had been made for my body. The salesman even said that. But see, we recognize, God, we can't afford to spend much, but this is a job requirement. So God, I pray that you'd provide. And God did in such a marvelous and a wonderful way. And that's where I think that we have to understand that we can talk ourselves into stuff that is not in our best interest just because we have a passion for it. We have a desire for it, a lust for it. And I've found that when you wait upon the Lord, that God tends to take care of you in a very special way. And when you cast your concerns on his shoulders and say, Lord, would you help me with this? He does over and over again. So the thing is, I think it's dangerous that we need to be aware the first step towards living an honest life is not to deceive ourselves. Because if you become accustomed to self-deception, then you'll become vulnerable to all kinds of deception. There was somebody some years ago when the whole LGBTQ thing started getting some traction in society. This is probably a decade ago. And he was a theologian who made this interesting statement. He says, if you can convince people that men can become women, you can convince them of anything. In other words, he was saying, if you can get people to believe something that's so palpably untrue, so inarguably untrue, and they begin to believe it's true, they will then lose all basis for evaluating what is true and false altogether. And that's kind of what happens to us, that when we give in, it's, for example, people are living in some kind of sinful lifestyle, at least according to the biblical definition, and we go, well, I know it's not right, but hey, who am I to judge? And then you just kind of let it go. You don't even pray for them. What you're doing is you're justifying something that's deceitful. It's dishonest. You're pretending that what they're doing is okay when it's not. You're not speaking the truth in love. You're not speaking the truth at all. And so you allow yourself to be deceived. And what happens is now you become a deceiver. And this is one of the great problems in Christianity in the Western societies today, is that we find that even from the pulpits, people are saying things that are not true. And that these pastors become, without realizing it, they are becoming deceivers. As somebody was telling me, they were in this church and they were leaving the staff of the church because they said the pastor apologizes for teachings in the scriptures. And they said they just can't handle this. And I thought, well, good for you. But that's so crazy, because this pastor would be offended if they were to come up and say, well, what you're doing is teaching false doctrine. Because he's thinking he's being, very enlightened and very current and, stating things that are obvious to him and true. You begin by deceiving yourself, believing that as a pastor, you begin to believe that it's more important that people like you than it is to tell them the truth. And believe me, I understand how unattractive telling people the truth can be. It really can come back in very, very unloving ways. But I would rather do that than to say things that aren't true, that I know that aren't true. And so one of the things that begins with, we have to be true with ourselves. That's why David says in Psalm 139, search me, O God, and know my heart, and reveal to me if there's any wicked way in me. Help me to see where I'm believing in a lie, because that's what it is. Because if I believe in a lie about myself, then it's only a matter of time that I'll begin to believe lies about other people and believe other people's lies, and I will become a deceiver. So all of these things that he's warning us about have this downward trajectory. You don't just start downhill. You ever been on a hill that's so steep that you can't stop your momentum? And the more you go down the hill, the faster you go until finally you take a tumble and fall and roll? I have. And let me tell you, it's not fun. It's not happy. And the whole point is getting back out of that hole that you rolled into can be so much more hard work than it was to get into it. But how did you get there? By taking a step down towards something that you would have been advised not to do. And that's kind of what deception is. If I allow myself to believe things that aren't true about myself, and that's really where resentment really kicks in again, is where, how dare they say that or feel that or think that about me? I love something Gail Irwin used to say to pastors. He said, if you have more than one person who's listening to you, then you have one more than you deserve. So it's the idea that we deserve to be respected and honored and treated. And, who are they to treat me that way? Where Jesus made himself of no reputation. And I remember being very guilty early in my ministry saying, well, my reputation is the most important thing to me, and I can't allow people to say things about me that aren't true. And I learned very quickly, you have no power to keep them from saying things about you that aren't true. Or even worse, they're saying things about yourself that are true and you're afraid to admit. Same difference, you end up living in deceit. So that's where we look to the Word so God would open our eyes to things we don't see readily. Let the Holy Spirit speak into my heart and my mind, and then confess them to God and help me to walk in the truth as it applies to me and towards other people. Many people can't be corrected because they won't hear what they need to hear. And this always leads to an unfortunate consequence. Well, out of time again. Thanks for hanging. We'll continue on with the next on the list, which is something I know that is so abstract you can't relate to it. It's called hypocrisy. God bless you. We'll talk about this tomorrow.